Run all you want, Hannah Walker. But Snow remembers every footprint. The voice came from somewhere behind her, half swallowed by the storm, and Hannah forced herself forward through the white dark with her thin cloak snapping at her back. Snow reached past her ankles, soft on top and cruel underneath, dragging at every step as if the forest itself wanted her to stop. Her lungs burned. Her fingers had gone numb inside the sleeves of her old gray dress. Behind her, shapes moved between the pines, not close enough to touch, never close enough to leave a mark, but near enough to turn every breath into panic. Winter Hollow's young wolves knew exactly how to chase without calling it chasing. They circled wide, cut off the clear paths, snapped branches in the dark, and drove her deeper toward the northern border where the trees grew taller and no one from her pack would have to admit what they had done. Hannah did not look back. Looking back made fear larger. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the pale break between the trees ahead and kept moving, one step, then another, her boots sinking, slipping, finding ground again. Only a few hours earlier, she had stood at the edge of the winter ceremony courtyard with a tray of hot cider in both hands, invisible in the way rejected Omegas learned to be. Lanterns had glowed across the stone yard. White ribbons had been tied to cedar posts. Everyone had dressed in their finest wool and silver clasps because Ryan Cole, the alpha's son and the man who had rejected her before the whole pack, was choosing his new mate under the snow moon. Brianna Hale had stood beside him in a white cloak trimmed with crystal beads, smiling like kindness had been stitched into her face. Hannah had tried not to listen when people whispered that Ryan had finally chosen someone worthy. She had tried not to feel the old ache when the elders brought out the sacred silver ring, the one passed through generations to bless a bond before the pack. She had only lowered her head and stepped back. Then the ring fell. It landed in the snow near Hannah's feet with a small sound no one else seemed to hear over Brianna's gasp. She did it, Brianna cried, her voice breaking perfectly. She tried to ruin the rite. Every face turned. Ryan did not ask. He did not hesitate. Believing Hannah guilty was easier than remembering she had once loved him quietly enough to let him go. The courtyard filled with accusation before truth had room to breathe. Hannah had bent down, picked up the ring with trembling hands, and wiped the snow from it with her own sleeve. Sacred things should not be left in the snow, she had whispered. That should have ended it. Instead, Ryan's pride turned colder than the night. By his order, she was driven from the courtyard before dawn, sent into the storm with no coat worth the weather and no chance to gather what little life she owned. Now the border ridge rose ahead, a shadow cut against the white sky, and the wolves behind her slowed as if they knew the chase was almost finished. Hannah stumbled to her knees, snow soaking through her dress, and for one terrible moment she could not make her body rise. A low growl rolled through the trees ahead of her, deeper than the storm, colder than the mountain wind. The wolves behind her stopped. Hannah lifted her head. A tall figure in a black northern cloak stepped out of the snow, silver eyes fixed on the pack behind her, his broad shoulders blocking the path like a wall the winter itself had built. He did not look back when he spoke. Behind me. Hannah did not move at first. Her knees were still pressed into the snow, her breath breaking in small white clouds, and the stranger's command seemed too impossible to belong to her. Behind me. No one had stood between Hannah Walker and Winter Hollow in years. People had stood around her, above her, in judgment of her, but never before her. The wolves at her back shifted uneasily among the pines, their forms half hidden by wind-blown snow. They were young, proud, and suddenly very still. The man in the black cloak did not raise a hand. He did not step forward. He only stood between them and the rejected Omega they had chased, and the whole forest seemed to understand that the chase was over. Hannah pushed herself up with trembling fingers, snow clinging to her sleeves, and stumbled behind him because her body obeyed the safety in his voice before her mind could question it. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever stood near, his pale face cut by the silver light of the storm, his dark hair dusted with snow. The cloak around his shoulders carried a northern crest at the clasp, a black pine beneath a crescent moon. Hannah knew that mark. Everyone near the border knew it. Northwood, the royal line of the northern crown. Her heart struck painfully against her ribs. The nearest wolf lowered his head. Then another. The third tried to back away through the trees. "Do not run from your own choices," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, but it traveled through the snow as if the mountain itself carried it. Shift back. The wolves hesitated. Hannah felt the old fear rise for them, not because they deserved her pity, but because command from true power left no room for pretense. One by one, the young wolves returned to human form beneath heavy cloaks kept tied to their packs, faces pale, eyes down. They looked smaller now than they had sounded in the dark. The tallest of them, Evan Pike, swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, we were only escorting her out of Winter Hollow territory." Hannah went still. "Your Majesty." The words confirmed what the crest had already whispered. The man shielding her from the storm was King Caleb Northwood, Alpha King of the North. He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at Hannah, but enough for her to feel that he knew she had heard. Then his attention returned to Evan. "Escorting?" Caleb asked. "Is that what you call driving a woman through snow without a coat fit for the weather?" Evan's mouth opened, then closed. The wind filled the silence for him. Caleb looked past the young men toward the trail they had carved through the drifts. "Go back to Winter Hollow. Tell Ryan Cole that the woman he sent into the storm will return with me. Tell your elders to gather in the ceremony yard, and tell them not to polish the truth before I arrive." The young men bowed so quickly Hannah almost flinched from the motion. They retreated through the trees, no longer circling, no longer laughing, only leaving tracks that looked suddenly shameful against the white ground. When they were gone, the forest softened around her. Hannah's strength went with them. She swayed once, and Caleb turned at last. His silver eyes found her face, and the cold authority in them shifted into something quieter. Not pity, something steadier. "Can you walk?" he asked. Hannah wanted to say yes. Pride pushed the word to her tongue, but her legs shook beneath her. Caleb seemed to understand before she answered. He removed his cloak and held it open, stopping short of touching her. "May I?" The question nearly broke her more than the storm had. Ryan had once taken her hand before the pact to reject her. Brianna had taken her silence and shaped it into guilt. Winter Hollow had taken her home and called it justice. But this king, who could command wolves with a whisper, asked permission before giving warmth. Hannah nodded. Caleb placed the cloak around her shoulders, careful, respectful, closing the clasp without brushing her skin more than necessary. Heat surrounded her, heavy with the scent of cedar, frost, and northern smoke. "Why did you stop them?" she asked, her voice rough with cold. Caleb looked toward the dark path back to Winter Hollow. "Because I saw you pick up the sacred ring." Hannah's breath caught. He had seen. In the courtyard, through the snow, through all the shouting, someone had seen the one thing she did not do for praise. Caleb offered his arm. And because anyone who protects what is holy while being falsely accused deserves to be protected in return. Hannah stared at his sleeve, then slowly placed her hand there. Together they turned back toward Winter Hollow, and for the first time that night, the footprints in the snow did not feel like proof of her running away. They felt like the road back to her own name. The walk back to Winter Hollow was slower than the chase had been, but every step carried more weight. Hannah kept her hand on Caleb's arm because the snow beneath her boots still shifted unpredictably, and because part of her feared that if she let go, the world would turn back into what it had been. Ryan's voice, Brianna's perfect gasp, the wolves behind her, the cold certainty that no one would ever ask what really happened. Caleb did not rush her. His cloak hung around her shoulders, warm and heavy, nearly brushing the snow behind her. The northern crest at the clasp rested near her collarbone, impossible to miss. It changed the way the forest felt. The same trees that had swallowed her panic now seemed to open a path. The same wind that had cut through her dress now moved around the cloak as if it recognized his authority. Caleb walked beside her in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "How long ago did Ryan Cole reject you?" Hannah's fingers tightened once on his sleeve. The question did not sound curious. It sounded like he was placing a missing piece into a larger pattern. 8 months, she said, during the spring moon ceremony. Publicly, a humorless breath escaped her. Everything Ryan does is public when he thinks it makes him look strong. Caleb's jaw shifted slightly, the only sign that the answer had landed. Hannah looked toward the faint lantern glow ahead, barely visible through the trees. He said the moon had made a mistake, that an alpha's son could not be bound to a quiet omega with no influence, no family power, and no future worth joining to his. The words came easier than she expected, Maybe because the snow had already heard her worst humiliation and kept walking beneath her anyway. After that, people stopped saying my name unless they needed someone to blame. Caleb's voice lowered. And tonight, they blamed you again. Brianna dropped the ring. Hannah paused, swallowing the old instinct to soften the truth. I heard it hit the snow before she cried out. It landed near my feet, so everyone believed her. I think Ryan wanted to believe her. Because your guilt protected his pride. The sentence was so exact that Hannah nearly stopped. She had felt that truth for months, but had never heard anyone powerful enough to say it without fear. Yes, she whispered. The lanterns grew brighter as they left the trees. Ahead, Winter Hollow's ceremony yard waited under falling snow, the ribbons still tied to cedar posts, the sacred platform still lit with candles. The pack gathered in uneasy clusters after Evan's warning. Music had not returned. Laughter had died. Ryan Cole stood near the center beside Brianna, his white ceremonial coat bright against the night, his posture stiff with the effort of appearing unshaken. When he saw Hannah walking beside Caleb Northwood beneath the royal cloak, his face changed in 3 stages: confusion, disbelief, and then the careful anger of a man whose story had been interrupted. The whole yard bowed when Caleb entered. Hannah felt the motion ripple around her like a wave. She almost stepped back from it, but Caleb's arm remained steady beneath her hand. He did not pull her forward. He did not hide her behind him. He let her stand where every person could see what they had sent into the storm had returned under the protection of the North. Ryan bowed last. Your Majesty, he said, voice smooth but tight. Had I known you were near our borders, Winter Hollow would have prepared a proper welcome. Caleb looked at the snow-covered courtyard, then at Hannah's soaked hem beneath his cloak. You prepared one, he said. I saw it in the woods. The silence sharpened. Brianna's bracelet gave a tiny nervous chime as her hand moved. Hannah heard it and remembered the ring falling. Caleb turned toward the elders. Bring the sacred ring. Elder Rowan, the oldest wolf in Winter Hollow, carried the silver ring forward on a velvet cloth. Caleb did not touch it. He looked at Hannah. Tell them what you did when it fell. Her throat tightened as every eye found her again. But this time, she was not alone in the center of their judgment. This time, the snow did not feel like a witness against her. It felt like a witness for the truth. Hannah lifted her chin. I picked it up, she said. I cleaned the snow from it. And I gave it back. The words were simple, but they changed the temperature of the courtyard. Hannah did not embellish them. She did not accuse with raised hands or plead with shaking breath. She only gave the truth room to stand, and for the first time, Winter Hollow had to look at it without the comfort of Ryan's voice covering it. Snow gathered on the cedar posts. The sacred ring rested on dark velvet between Elder Rowan's careful hands, its silver surface catching the candlelight. Caleb looked from Hannah to the elders, who saw the ring fall. No one answered at first. That silence was familiar to Hannah. It had followed every insult, every unfair order, every cruel whisper that people pretended not to hear because admitting truth would require courage. Ryan used that silence like shelter. Your Majesty, he said, stepping forward with controlled dignity. The ceremony was crowded. Emotions were high. Hannah has carried resentment since my rejection, and Brianna was understandably shaken. We acted to preserve the sanctity of the rite. Hannah felt the old shame move toward her, trained and obedient, ready to settle on her shoulders. But Caleb's cloak was already there, warm and royal, and shame found no place to land. Caleb turned his silver eyes on Ryan. You preserved the rite by sending the woman who protected its symbol into a storm. Ryan's jaw tightened. She created confusion. No, Caleb said. You used confusion. The words struck the courtyard with quiet force. Brianna shifted beside Ryan, her crystal beads chiming softly. Hannah heard the tiny sound and remembered the first chime, the one that had come just before the ring fell. Her breath caught. She turned toward Brianna. Your bracelet, Hannah said. Brianna went still. Caleb looked at Hannah, waiting, not doubting, waiting. Hannah forced herself to continue. When the ring fell, I heard that same sound. Your bracelet hit the tray before the ring dropped. The courtyard tightened around the sentence. Brianna gave a delicate laugh, but it broke at the edge. She is guessing. She was standing below the platform. She could not possibly know. I know sounds, Hannah said. I know the sound of a silver ring hitting snow. I know the sound of beads brushing metal. I know the sound of someone gasping before she is truly surprised. A small voice rose from near the cider table. I saw it. Everyone turned. A little boy, no older than 9, clutched his mother's sleeve with both hands. His face was pale, but his voice held. Lady Brianna's hand bumped the tray. The ring fell after that. Miss Hannah picked it up. His mother pulled him close, frightened by the attention, but Caleb's gaze softened. You have done the honorable thing, he said. The boy's shoulders eased. Around the yard, murmurs spread like wind across snow. Not loud, not wild, but undeniable. Brianna's breath quickened. Ryan looked at her, and for the first time that night, his certainty cracked. Elder Rowan lowered his head. Then the accusation was false. Caleb stepped closer to the sacred platform, his black coat moving with the storm. False and convenient. He looked across Winter Hollow, at the elders, the families, the young wolves who had chased Hannah until the snow erased their pride. You call yourselves guardians of sacred things, yet a ring received more protection from this Omega than she received from her own pack. No one moved. Hannah felt the sentence enter places her voice had never been allowed to reach. Caleb turned to her then, and the coldness in his face eased only enough for her to see the man beneath the crown. Hannah Walker, he said, you were wrong publicly. You will be answered publicly. Ryan drew in a breath, but Caleb did not look at him. Winter Hollow will withdraw its accusation. It will restore your name before this pack. And no wolf under my northern border will be driven into snow for another person's pride. The candles flickered. The snow kept falling. Hannah stood beneath the royal cloak, her hands trembling now not from cold, but from the unfamiliar weight of being believed. Elder Rowan turned to the gathered pack. Hannah Walker did not dishonor the right, he said, voice rough with age and shame. She preserved it. The words moved over the courtyard, and something inside Hannah loosened. Something that had been tied tight since the day Ryan rejected her. She did not smile. The wound was too old for that. But she breathed, fully, as if the winter had finally given back the air it had taken. The apology did not come all at once. It arrived in pieces, carried by lowered eyes, trembling breaths, and the slow, difficult movement of people learning they had stood on the wrong side of cruelty. Hannah remained near the sacred platform with Caleb's cloak around her shoulders while Elder Rowan held the silver ring before the pack. Ryan stared at the snow as if it might open and spare him from the shame he had once handed so easily to her. Brianna's polished composure had faded into silence, her white cloak no longer bright beneath the lanterns, only pale against the storm. Caleb did not rush the moment. He let Winter Hollow feel the weight of it. That was the difference between power and noise, Hannah realized. Ryan had always filled rooms quickly, with commands and certainty and the kind of pride that demanded applause. Caleb could stand still and make every lie grow tired of holding itself upright. Elder Rowan turned toward Hannah, his old voice thick with remorse. This pack failed you. The words were formal, but the pain inside them was not. Hannah looked at him, then at the people who had watched her serve tea, mend torn sleeves, soothe crying children, and walk home alone after being rejected. Some faces showed regret. Some showed discomfort. Some showed the frightened calculation of those who wondered what the Alpha King would do next. Hannah understood then that being believed did not erase what had happened. It only opened the first door out of it. You did, she said softly. No one breathed for a moment. She was not supposed to agree so plainly. An Omega was expected to forgive quickly so everyone else could feel clean. But Caleb had said she would be answered publicly, and Hannah would not shrink from the truth just to make the room warmer. But I failed myself too. Every time I let your silence teach me I deserved less. The sentence surprised her with its steadiness. Caleb turned his head slightly, and though he did not speak, she felt his attention settle beside her like a hand at her back. Ryan finally looked up. Hannah, I never meant for it to go this far. Her name in his mouth sounded strange now, smaller than it used to. Once, she would have carried that sentence for days, searching it for apology, affection, regret, anything she could use to make the rejection hurt less. Now she heard only the careful distance between intention and consequence. It went exactly as far as you allowed it, she said. Ryan had no answer. Brianna whispered, I was afraid. Hannah faced her. So was I. The simplicity of it ended the excuse. Snow fell harder, softening hair, cloaks, and the edges of the platform. Caleb stepped forward at last. Winter Hollow will send a written restoration of Hannah Walker's standing to every pack that received word of her rejection disgrace. Her name will be cleared beyond this yard. A murmur moved through the crowd. Caleb continued, colder now. Ryan Cole will not preside over any mate right until the Northern Council reviews his conduct. Brianna Hale will answer to the elders for false testimony. And the wolves who chased Hannah into the border woods will serve the winter shelters until they learn what protection means. There was no spectacle in the judgment, no cruelty for the crowd to feed on, only order returning to a place that had mistaken humiliation for strength. Hannah listened, feeling relief and grief braid together inside her. Then Caleb turned back to her, and the sharpness in his face softened. "That is what the North can require," he said. "What do you require?" The question moved through her more deeply than any decree. Hannah looked at the ceremony yard, the lanterns, the ring, the people who had finally bowed their heads after years of looking down. She thought of her small cabin near the tree line, the blankets folded inside, the herbs drying by the stove, the life she had made out of scraps of acceptance. "I want one night to gather my things," she said. "And I want to leave by choice, not exile." Caleb inclined his head. "Then you will." Elder Rowan bowed. "Where will you go?" Hannah looked at the northern cloak around her shoulders, then toward the dark road beyond the gate where Caleb had found her in the snow. For the first time, the unknown did not feel like punishment. It felt like a horizon. "North," she said. And this time, no one dared call it running. Hannah spent the last night in Winter Hollow inside the little cabin no one had ever bothered to visit unless they needed something mended, mixed, or forgiven. The stove burned low, filling the room with the scent of cedar chips and dried mint, while snow pressed softly against the windows like the world was trying to listen. Caleb did not enter without being invited. He stood outside beneath the eaves with two northern guards at a respectful distance, giving her the space to gather a life that fit into one worn leather bag. Hannah folded her spare dress, her mother's shawl, 3 bundles of healing herbs, and a small wooden box of letters she had never sent. 4 months after Ryan's rejection, she had written what she could not say aloud, then hidden each page away because pain felt safer when no one could read it. Now she tied the box shut and placed it in the bag without opening it. Some wounds did not need to be studied before they could be left behind. Just before dawn, a knock sounded at the door. Not forceful, not royal, just 3 quiet taps. Hannah opened it to find Caleb standing in the blue light of morning, his black coat dusted with snow, silver eyes calm and watchful. "Are you ready?" he asked. Hannah looked back once. The narrow bed, the chipped cup by the stove, the herbs hanging from the beam. The room had sheltered her, but it had never been home enough to ask her to stay. "Yes," she said. Caleb's gaze moved to the bag in her hand. "May I carry that?" The question almost made her smile through the ache. "It is not heavy." "That was not what I asked." For a moment, Hannah could not speak. So many people had taken choices from her and called it help. Caleb kept offering choices and calling it respect. She handed him the bag. Outside, Winter Hollow had gathered along the main road in silence. No celebration, no music, only people standing in the snow while the rejected Omega they had chased into the woods walked out through the front gate under the cloak of the Alpha King. Elder Rowan waited near the cedar posts with the sacred ring held in both hands. "Miss Walker," he said, voice rough, "the ring is returned to the shrine because of you." Hannah stopped. The old part of her wanted to bow and disappear before anyone changed their mind. Instead, she looked at the ring, then at the faces beyond it. "Then guard what it means better than you guarded the silver," she said. Elder Rowan lowered his head. The path opened. Caleb walked beside her, carrying her bag as if it were something honored, not something small. Ryan stood near the far edge of the crowd, pale and silent, Brianna beside him with her eyes lowered. Hannah felt no triumph when she passed them. Triumph would have tied her to the moment. She wanted freedom instead. At the gate, Caleb's carriage waited with dark horses and northern banners moving in the wind. Hannah paused before stepping inside. Beyond the road, the forest glowed pale with morning snow, the same forest that had swallowed her fear only hours before. "I thought leaving would feel like losing everything," she said quietly. Caleb stood beside her, not pressing, not answering too quickly. "And does it?" Hannah breathed in the cold air. It entered clean. It left easier than before. "No," she said. It feels like putting something down. Caleb's expression softened. Then let the North carry what comes next with you. Hannah placed one foot on the carriage step, then looked back one final time at Winter Hollow. No one called her burden. No one called her rejected. The silence that followed her now was not accusation. It was witness. She entered the carriage by choice, and as the wheels began to turn north, the first sunlight touched the snow until every footprint behind her shone gold. The carriage rolled north through a world remade in white. Hannah sat beside the frosted window with Caleb's cloak still around her shoulders and watched Winter Hollow disappear into a blur of pines, smoke, and distance. At first, she expected grief to rise sharply, the way it had when Ryan rejected her, but what came instead was quieter. Not emptiness. Space. The kind of space a person feels when a door closes behind them and no one is waiting on the other side to pull them back. Caleb rode in the carriage across from her, his posture straight, his silver eyes turned toward the road ahead. He had returned her bag after placing it carefully beside her feet, as if even her smallest belongings deserved respect. For several miles, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was snow falling on a wound, cool and clean, giving pain somewhere to rest. By midday, the storm thinned, and the northern mountains appeared beyond the tree line, dark blue against the pale sky. Hannah had heard stories of Northwood territory since childhood, stone halls carved into cliffs, wolves who ran under green winter lights, a king whose judgment could freeze a room before a single word was raised. She stole a glance at Caleb and wondered how the man who could stop wolves in a snowstorm was also the man who had asked to carry her bag. He noticed without turning fully. You are wondering if the stories are true. Hannah looked down, embarrassed. Some of them. The worst ones are usually told by people who wanted mercy without accountability. She almost smiled. And the best ones. His gaze shifted to her, calm and unreadable except for a softness that had not been there the night before. Those are usually unfinished. The answer settled between them like a promise he had not yet named. They stopped near a frozen overlook so the horses could rest. Below, a river cut through the valley, half covered in ice, its dark water moving with quiet determination. Hannah stepped out carefully, boots sinking into fresh snow. The cold touched her face, but Caleb's cloak held warmth around her. She stood at the edge of the overlook, not too close, and breathed. No shouting behind her. No accusing crowd. No footsteps chasing. Only wind, water, and the distant call of northern birds. Caleb came to stand several feet away, giving her room. When we reach Northwood Keep, he said, you will have chambers of your own. The healers may ask about your herbs if you wish to share them. The council may ask questions, but you are not required to answer any that make you feel small. Hannah turned toward him. You make it sound easy. It will not be. He did not soften the truth, and somehow that made it easier to trust. Some will wonder why I brought a rejected Omega to the Northern Court. Some will see your past before they see you, but they will not be allowed to define you by it. Hannah held the edge of the cloak, feeling the northern crest beneath her fingers. And how will you define me? Caleb was silent long enough that the river below seemed to answer first. Then he said, I will not. I would rather learn who you are from the way you choose to stand when no one is chasing you. The words reached a place in Hannah that praise never had. Praise could be taken back. Choice could grow roots. By sunset, Northwood Keep rose ahead, black stone towers glowing with amber windows against the snow. Guards lined the road, but they did not stare with hunger for gossip. They bowed as the carriage passed. Hannah's pulse quickened anyway. Caleb opened the carriage door himself when they stopped beneath the great arch. He offered his hand, palm steady, patient. Hannah looked at the keep, at the road behind them, at the snow that no longer carried only fear. Then she placed her hand in his and stepped down into the north, not as the girl who had been chased from Winter Hollow, but as the woman who had chosen where her story would go next. Northwood Keep received Hannah with a silence unlike any she had known. Winter Hollow's silence had always been sharp, filled with judgment waiting behind closed mouths. But this silence was spacious, careful, almost reverent. The entry hall rose high above her, carved from black stone veined with silver, its arched windows catching the last blue light of evening. Banners bearing the Northwood crest hung between pillars, dark pine beneath a crescent moon, the same symbol resting at her throat on Caleb's cloak. Servants stood back from the path, without staring too long. Guards lowered their heads, not only to Caleb, but to the woman he had brought through the gates by his own hand. Hannah's first instinct was to search for the nearest wall, the safest corner, the place where an unwanted Omega could make herself useful and unnoticed. Caleb seemed to sense it. "You do not have to disappear here," he said quietly. The words were so gentle that they almost hurt. She looked at the polished floor beneath her boots, where snow from the journey melted in small, clear drops. "I do not know how to do anything else yet." Caleb did not correct her. He only nodded, as if honesty deserved more respect than confidence. "Then begin by staying where you are." A woman in a deep green healer's dress approached with a warm shawl over one arm and a kind face lined by years rather than suspicion. "Miss Walker, I am Nora Vale, keeper of the Winter Infirmary. His Majesty said you work with herbs." Hannah blinked, startled by the directness of being addressed, as if her skills mattered. "A little." Nora smiled. "A little is how every useful thing begins. When you are rested, I would be honored to see what you brought." Hannah thought of the bundles in her bag, the small proof of a life spent caring for people who rarely cared back. "I would like that," she said, and meant it. Caleb watched the exchange without claiming credit for it, which somehow made it matter more. Later, after Hannah was shown to a chamber overlooking a snowy courtyard, she stood alone beside the hearth and let the warmth reach her slowly. The room had a bed with thick blankets, a writing desk, fresh water, and a window that faced north toward mountains glowing faintly under the stars. Her bag rested on a cedar chest, untouched. No one had opened it. No one had decided what she should keep. She removed her mother's shawl and folded it carefully over the chair, then set the wooden box of unsent letters on the desk. For the first time, the box did not feel like a grave for words. It felt like something she might one day choose to open. A soft knock came at the door. Hannah turned. "Come in." Caleb entered only after the invitation, stopping just inside the threshold. Without his storm cloak, he looked even taller, dressed in dark formal clothes that belonged to a king, yet his expression held the same restraint as when he had stood between her and the wolves. "The council has been informed," he said. "They will meet tomorrow. You do not have to attend unless you wish to." Hannah looked at him carefully. "Will they talk about me if I am not there?" "Yes." "Then I will attend." Something like approval moved through his eyes, quiet and bright. "As you choose." She almost laughed at how unfamiliar those 3 words still felt. Caleb reached into his coat and brought out the sacred ring from Winter Hollow, wrapped in a square of dark cloth. Hannah's breath caught. "Why do you have that?" Elder Rowan asked that it be delivered to the Northern Archive until Winter Hollow proves it understands what sacred means. He placed it on the desk, not in her hands, not as a burden, simply within sight. "I thought you should know it is safe." Hannah stared at the ring, remembering snow, accusation, and the small act of picking it up when everyone else was too busy blaming her to protect what they claimed to honor. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb's gaze softened. "You protected it when no one protected you. That will not be forgotten here." Outside, bells rang once across the keep, low and clear over the winter courtyard. Hannah stood in the warm room with the cloak still around her shoulders, the ring safe on the desk, and the Alpha King of the North waiting at the door as if her comfort mattered more than ceremony. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel like a rejected thing brought in from the cold. She felt like a truth the North had made room for. The council chamber of Northwood Keep was built to make voices honest. Its ceiling rose into shadow, its black stone walls held no tapestries to soften the truth, and every seat faced the center where the sacred ring from Winter Hollow rested on a narrow silver stand. Hannah stood beside it in Caleb's cloak, not behind him, not hidden near the door, but in the place where witnesses belonged. The Northern Council watched her with careful attention. Some faces were curious. Some were cautious. None were cruel. Caleb stood to her left, his presence steady as a mountain in winter. "This ring was nearly used to bury a lie," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "But Hannah Walker protected it while being accused of dishonoring it. Remember that when you speak of rank, rejection, or worth." Lord Mercer, an older counselor with a frost-white beard, leaned forward. "Miss Walker, what does Winter Hollow need from the North now?" The question startled her. She had expected them to ask what punishment she wanted, what title she claimed, what proof she carried. Instead, They asked what a broken place needed. Hannah looked at the ring, remembering snow melting against her sleeve as she cleaned it. They need to learn that honor is not a ceremony, she said slowly. It is how they treat someone when no one important is watching. Silence followed, but it was the good kind, the kind that gave words somewhere to settle. Nora Vale nodded from the healer's bench. Caleb's silver eyes warmed, though his face remained composed. Then that will be the first lesson, he said. By sunset, the decree was written. No pack under the Northern Crown could exile, chase, or publicly shame an Omega without full council review. No rejection could be used as permission for cruelty. No sacred rite could proceed where truth was ignored for pride. Hannah listened as the words were read in the great hall before guards, healers, servants, and northern families gathered beneath winter banners. She felt the weight of every sentence, not as revenge, but as shelter being built for the next girl who might stand alone in snow. When the reading ended, Caleb turned to her before the entire hall. The North cannot erase what was done to you, he said, but it can make certain your pain becomes protection for others. Hannah's throat tightened. For so long, her hurt had been treated like something embarrassing, something to hide behind closed doors and quiet work. Now it was being transformed into law, not because she was powerful, but because she had survived without becoming cruel. Caleb removed the sacred ring from its stand and placed it into a glass case beside the northern crest. Let this remain here until Winter Hollow earns it back, he said. Then he looked at Hannah. And let it be known who kept it worthy. The hall bowed. Not to Caleb. To her. Hannah did not know how to carry that kind of honor yet, but she let herself stand still beneath it. Afterward, she stepped onto the balcony overlooking the snowy courtyard, where lanterns glowed like small golden stars. Caleb joined her, asking with his silence before coming close. Below, children ran carefully through fresh snow while guards watched with patient smiles. No one was chasing anyone. The sight made Hannah breathe out a laugh that was almost a sob. I used to think snow only kept proof of where I had been forced to run, she said. Caleb stood beside her, tall and quiet, his dark coat brushing the rail. What does it keep now? Hannah looked at the courtyard, at the lanterns, at the road north that had carried her here by choice. A beginning. Caleb's voice softened. Then let it be yours. She turned toward him, and for the first time, she did not feel like the rejected Omega from Winter Hollow. She felt like Hannah Walker, a woman whose name had crossed the border before shame could bury it, a woman who had been believed, protected, and finally allowed to choose. As snow fell over Northwood Keep, covering the old roads in white, Hannah rested her hand on the royal cloak at her shoulders and understood that the Alpha King had not saved her by standing in front of her forever. He had saved her by giving her a place where she could stand for herself.